Hey folks, Rob Breakenridge here. This year's been another devastating one for wildfires in many parts of the country. In fact, here in Alberta, of course, we just marked the 1 year anniversary of the devastating wildfire that tore through the town of Jasper. I think in these circumstances, people expect and understand that governments need to take steps to deal with the threat posed by wildfires. Things like banning campfires or other outdoor activities during a period of elevated fire risk make sense and can be justified. In extreme situations, governments can obviously evacuate and block off entire communities. What they're doing in the province of Nova Scotia is far less common and proving to be far more controversial: a total ban on accessing the woods, even including something as innocuous as walking on a trail. And the punishment is severe: a whopping $25,000 fine for violating the ban. Already, we've seen some openly defying the ban as a form of protest. Others seem confused as to what exactly the ban is meant to apply to. It's all led to quite a debate about government overreach and striking the right balance between respecting civil liberties and mitigating the risk to the public posed by wildfires. Here's how Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston explained and justified the policy when he announced it last week.
Effective 4 p.m. today, we're telling Nova Scotians, stay out of the woods. We are restricting travel and activities that really aren't necessary for most of us. Hiking, camping, fishing, and the use of vehicles in the woods are not permitted. Trail systems through woods are off limits. Camping is allowed, but only in official campgrounds. The fine for violating any of these bans is the same as the fine for the ban on burning, $25,000. And if you're a smoker, for God's sakes, be mindful of where you're butting your butt out. If you don't, and you cause a fire, we will hold you accountable. So what does this mean if you have a home or cottage surrounded by a wooded area? We strongly encourage you to stay out of those woods, regardless of where they are. Please don't do anything that could unnecessarily put you, your family, or your neighbors at risk. This situation sucks. Summer is one of the best times in Nova Scotia, and we all look forward to getting outdoors and enjoying our scenic beauty that surrounds us. I get that, and I'm right there with you as Nova Scotians. But you can still go to the beach. In fact, that's a great place to be on these hot, dry days. Just no bonfires. If there's a short trail to get from point A to point B, like from the parking to the beach or to the lake to fish, that's fine. But that's it. No heading into the woods to spend time there. I know it's inconvenient. I know it's the height of summer vacation and people want to do all the activities that we so much enjoy in our great outdoors. We have a beautiful province. I know everybody wants to enjoy it, but we have to stay out of the woods. It's a small price to pay right now to avoid the kind of devastation that we saw from the wildfires in 2023.
Well, one of the groups pushing back against the policy is the Canadian Constitution Foundation. They're urging the Premier to rescind the ban, and in the meantime, they've launched a petition against it, which you can find at theccf.ca. Joining us now is Josh Dehaas. He's counsel with the Canadian Constitution Foundation. Josh, so great to have you with us here.
Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, first of all, I don't remember a province or a jurisdiction responding to a wildfire threat in this way. As far as you can tell, is this kind of unprecedented?
So what's unprecedented is actually the fines associated with this. So it's actually not the first time that Nova Scotia has said people can't go into the woods at all. It's not common for these things to happen in Canada, but Nova Scotia has done this in the past. But what's changed is that they've now added $25,000 fines, and they've said if you go into the woods for any reason, and woods is quite broadly defined, including on other people's private property, so it doesn't apply to your own private property, you're going to face this $25,000 fine. There's been at least one person fined already, and there might be more to come. And the Premier has said that they're looking for a zero tolerance approach this time.
When it comes to these sorts of emergency situations, we know the serious threat the wildfires can pose. I know governments have some leeway when it comes to banning certain activities or in more extreme circumstances, forcing evacuations from communities, that sort of thing. So in terms of the leeway and powers that governments have, does this give us a sense of maybe where that line is or ought to be?
So I think governments do have powers to impose restrictions for bona fide reasons, to protect public safety, to prevent wildfires. And burn bans, for example, saying you can't have a campfire or you can't burn anything on your private property in periods of high forest fire risk. Those are justified, and I think pretty much every province does that, and most Canadians understand that that's a fairly reasonable restriction on their freedoms. But when it comes to saying you can't do activities that have essentially no fire risk at all, or very, very minimal fire risk, like just walking on a trail, or taking your family into your backyard property where there's a bunch of trees and sitting down and having a coffee with them or something is illegal, well, that's where it becomes a really big issue in terms of the law.
Right. So banning certain activities is a different kind of situation, right? I mean, having campfires or driving ATVs poses a much different kind of risk than just, walking and sitting, right? So there's a distinction that could be made there.
Yeah, there's a big distinction that could be made there. You can look at the wildfire statistics yourself. Nova Scotia publishes really good annual statistics on what the causes, or what they believe the causes of each wildfire that happens was. And you can look at the top of the list, and at the top of the list are essentially arson and campfires. There are also, other brush fires that happen when people try to clear out their property and it's really dry. ATVs is on the list. It's not that high. It's maybe several ATVs a year cause fires in Nova Scotia. But they know the activities that do cause fire, and simply walking down a trail is not one of those activities. Simply fishing is not. So what they're really saying is, people can't be trusted at all to use the public forests and the public lands, or even in some cases the private forests, right? So it's pretty extreme when it's capturing those activities as well.
Right. So it seems like, not just an infringement on constitutional rights, but an unjustified one.
Yeah, and in fact, that might be the bigger issue here, is that before you even get into the charter rights of it, the particular act in Nova Scotia authorizes them to do things to prevent forest fires and protect the forests. But I don't think that Forests Act that they use ever contemplated closing all of the forests to every activity, except for where they give a permit. And curiously enough, they give a permit to things like forestry that probably pose a much bigger risk than something like merely walking or hiking through a trail, right? So the arbitrariness of it and the overbreadth is really the problem here. Nobody has a problem with evidence-based restrictions like banning campfires in times of high risk.
So the CCF has taken a couple of steps here. One was to reach out directly to the government of Nova Scotia, laying out concerns. And the other is the petition. And we'll get to the petition in a second. But did you get any kind of response? Has the government outlined its justification for why they're doing this?
So we haven't had any particular response. All we've heard from the government is what they said during their initial press conference. They said that they're, low on water. There's been a bit of a drought. They said that there's not a lot of rain coming in the forecast, or perhaps no rain in their particular forecast. And so that's essentially their justification is, better safe than sorry. Like, they had a very scary and disturbing wildfire in 2023 in Nova Scotia. And so I think that memory is with a lot of people, and that might be causing people to have a bit of an emotional overreaction and go too far in this case. But in terms of responding to us, they haven't sent us any formal response.
And so what does the petition call for, and what kind of response has that received?
Yeah, so the petition has received a really, really big response. There are several thousand signatures already. Not everybody's in Nova Scotia, obviously, but we've heard from many individual Nova Scotians as well who say, I get the burn ban, I get the risk, but I should be able to walk my dog, or I should be able to use the trail that I use to bike my kids to summer camp, and now I'm going to have to put them in an Uber or something instead. Or I live in a rural area and I can't get to work now without going on a trail. So I don't know that the government really thought through all of the ways that this is going to seriously impact people. And all we're asking the government to do is rescind this travel ban and in its place put in reasonable restrictions. Just before this travel ban, a week before, they put in a total burn ban. And, I don't know whether that's justified or not, but that's not the type of thing where there's no reasonable argument that you should have a province-wide burn ban, right? So we're saying rewrite this order so that it doesn't preclude all of these activities that just don't really have any risk of fire.
What concerns me too, and I mean, especially with the public reaction that this seems unnecessary and an overreach, like you need the public buy-in on these kinds of measures. You need the public to have confidence. And when the government says, look, we've got a situation, we need to deal with it, that the public accepts that as reasonable. If you get to a point where the public doesn't trust the government or feels like what they're asking is unreasonable, that erodes that confidence and that trust. Is that a concern here?
I think that's a really, really important point. I remember during COVID-19, the pandemic, obviously the pandemic was really serious. There were huge risks to people, and it was important that the government put in some restrictions. But when they went so far as, vaccine passports for kids who don't face particularly high risk, or in Ontario, we had school was canceled for almost longer than anywhere on the planet, even though, again, kids faced very low risk. What that did was, I think, lead to vaccine hesitancy right now. So I think what we're seeing is, because that public trust was lost, the government was saying, implying that kids were at a much bigger risk than they were. I'm no epidemiologist, obviously, but I think that the government sort of crying wolf or going too far in these restrictions, where it just doesn't make common sense to regular people, means that in the future they're not going to listen to you when we really do need the public to listen to public officials and take what they have to say to heart.
Right. So in that sense, I mean, this is a message to the Nova Scotia government to maybe reconsider this, but also, to other governments who I'm sure are looking at this situation and wondering whether this is something they might consider or deploy in the future.
Absolutely. So what we're seeing right now on social media is, there are forest fires here in Ontario. In southern Ontario is quite dry right now, just like Nova Scotia is. Some of those fires are under control, and some of them are not under control. But you see people looking at what they're doing in Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick, by the way, also has a very similar ban in place. And people are saying, well, why isn't Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, putting in a travel ban to forests? And we want to say, look, Doug Ford, there are a lot of people that have been really impacted by Nova Scotia's ban. So if you need to put in place fire restrictions, make sure that they're proportionate, make sure that they're reasonable, and that they target the actual risks like campfires or ATVs off-road, and not target things like bird watching.
We'll see where it all goes from here. Much more is mentioned, the ccf.ca. Josh, thanks so much for joining us here. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Rob.